Let's make pie. Hey, it's Tanya from My Forking Life, and today we are making one of my favorite pie recipes, a southern pecan pie. Is it pecan? Doesn't matter. Anyways, I love pie. I've got so many different pie recipes on the blog, from sweet potato pie to chest pie, even a homemade pie crust from scratch, which I won't be making today because I'm gonna cheat a little bit. But anyways, you're gonna love this recipe as much as I do. All right, let's get started. For this recipe, you're only going to use a few ingredients because pecan pie is basically a custard pie that has pecans within it. So to build our custard, we are going to use sugars, of course. I'm using dark brown sugar rather than light brown sugar because I like the color that it gives. But if you don't have dark brown, you can totally use light brown. I'm also using some eggs as well as maple syrup as a sweetener. Most recipes use corn syrup, but I like the flavor that maple syrup gives, and I just prefer to use it over corn syrup because I usually always have maple syrup around. We're also going to use some vanilla extract, some butter because butter is good, a little bit of salt, as well as some flour to help thicken that custard up. And of course, the main ingredient, pecans. I use chopped pecans for my recipe. I just like the way they feel within that pie. And of course, a pie crust. This one's store-bought, but that's fine. So the first thing we're going to do when we're making this pie is prepare the pie crust. And I am going to par bake my pie crust rather than just filling it in without doing anything to the crust beforehand. Now, earlier when I was talking to my husband about baking this pie, I kept on saying, yeah, I got to blind bake the crust. And he's like, what is that? Well, that's not what we're doing here, but there is a difference between par baking and blind baking. The difference is when you're blind baking, you're baking your crust completely through because you are making a filling that you don't want to bake. So that's good with like icebox pies or any pie that you don't want that filling to bake. Par baking it is when you're slightly baking your crust before you add your filling. That is going to basically make sure that you don't have one of those soggy bottoms on the bottom after you fill your crust in. So I'm going to bake my custard, the sweet potato, not sweet potato, goodness gracious, I'm talking. I'm going to bake my pecan pie custard in the pie crust, but I don't just want to pour it in without par baking. And if you forget to do that, which I have done before, it's okay. Your pie will still be delicious. All right, so let's get started. So because I am using store-bought crust, it does tell me exactly how long I need to par bake my crust, and I'm going to do it on 450 degrees Fahrenheit for about 10 minutes. Like I said, our point is not to bake the crust fully through, but it is to allow it to get a little bit of a head start before we add the filling so that it's not all soggy on the bottom. Now, whenever I get one of these pie crusts, see, it's kind of small. It's not going to fill my entire pie plate. So I always like to give it a little bit of a roll to stretch it out a little bit just to make sure it fits. And don't be like me. Have a bigger rolling pin for this. Little marks in my feet. And make sure you move that crust around so it doesn't just get stuck to your thing. Woo. Yeah, I meant to bring my bigger rolling pin and I forgot. That should be about good. Oops. And I learned this trick in a pie baking class I took because I'm always taking random class. You kind of just want to put your pie plate over it just to see that the crust goes a little bit, about an inch or two, about beyond your actual pie plate. All right, so I think we're good enough here. I'm going to just lift that up and I'm just going to rest that in. Voila. All right. I like to make sure my pie crust, the bottoms are flush against the sides. If they are not, it becomes a headache when it bakes. And because I have all this excess dough that's hanging over, it becomes easier to crimp it. I'm also not the best crimper, but you know what? Life is a journey, and one day I will be the best pie crust crimper ever. But for now, I just be like just making up stuff. Like, you know what? I'm just gonna do a little bit of a pinch and a, oh gosh, this is a little bit rough. But that's how you know it's homemade, because it's not going to be perfect. But it will taste really good. So now that I have got my pie crust in my plate, I am going to follow the manufacturer's instruction and prick the bottom as well as the sides before I par bake this crust. Now, another method, if you don't prick it and you don't want to prick it, is you could put weights in the actual crust. I would do this when I make a homemade crust, where you would put parchment paper liner in there, and you can put, let's say, pie weights or beans. That would also help this pie crust not bubble up when you are baking it. But no one's really going to see these little fork bubbles except you. Voila. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this in my oven, and then I'll be back when this is done and it's time to prepare our filling. All right, so we have par baked our crust. So it's not completely done, but it is done enough so that when we add our filling, it will be nice and sturdy enough to hold our pecan pie. All right, so let's get to this filling. All right, so I'm gonna start by prepping my ingredients, and I'm going to melt some butter, unsalted butter, by the way. And I do this by just popping it in the microwave and putting it on little increments and praying that it doesn't explode all over my microwave. It didn't explode. All right, let's get to making this filling. So before I even start here, I am going to take my chopped pecans. I'm all over the place. Before I start here, I'm going to take my chopped pecans, and I'm just going to spread them evenly on the bottom of the crust. Why do we do this, you say? Well, mainly because we give the pecans a chance to be evenly distributed in the pie. And while the pie is baking, even though we're going to put the filling on top, those pecans will rise to the top. I'm going to break that one just a bit. All right, so I'm going to set that to the side while I mix my filling. So I like to start by cracking 3 eggs into a big bowl. I am cracking my eggs over the bowl only because, since I'm starting with my eggs, if there is a shell, I'll be able to see it and retrieve it. And I'm gonna whisk these eggs until they're light and fluffy. We want to get rid of those streaks. Are my arms tired? That's enough. Now I'm gonna add my sweeteners, which will be my brown sugar. Just kind of mix that in there, breaking it up as it goes. I kind of just plopped in there, as well as your maple syrup. Try to make sure I break up any big blots of sugar that might have stuck together. Gonna add in my vanilla extract. A little bit of salt. Salt in baking is delicious because it just basically is a flavor enhancer. So it doesn't make your dessert salty. It just balances that extra sweet flavor. And then I'm gonna add my butter that has been melted, but also slightly cooled. You don't wanna add butter that's too hot because you don't want it to cook your eggs yet, until you add it to the oven. And then I'm gonna add my thickener, which will be my all-purpose flour. I do not like to just dump it in there. I like to sift it in there. It makes it easier to have the flour distribute and not give you those big flour clumps. Just mix it and shift it. And before you even start this, because you par baked your crust, your oven will probably already be on. You do want to lower that temp and preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit so that when you place your custard in your pie crust, you can just go ahead and bake it. It smells good. It hasn't even baked and it just smells like really good pie filling. All that flour in there. So I'm gonna just mix it just a little bit more to make sure all that flour got evenly distributed. And then I'm just going to put it in right over those pecans. And they're not gonna rise to the top yet. They rise to the top while it's baking. At least some of them are rising to the top now. They're not listening to me. Goodness gracious. All right, here we go. You're going to want to make sure you preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to bake this for about 40 to 45 minutes. And if you're baking it and you're noticing that your pie crust is getting too dark while you're baking, they have those little tools. You can kind of cover it, or you can just use some foil paper to make sure that this does not get too dark while it's baking. Anyways, let me go bake this pie, and I'll be back when it's done. And our pie is done baking. And the way that you'll see my pie poofed up a little bit. That is normal. You just want to make sure it's not super wet. It's a little bit jiggly. And what I like to do is test to make sure that that custard has reached at least 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 93 degrees Celsius. And I just take a thermometer and go in where one of the cracks in just to make sure that I've reached that temp. I've gone a little bit over, but that's fine. At least I know it won't be runny. The next step is you don't want to dig into this pie immediately. I like to actually let my custard pies set overnight. I think what it does is it makes that custard nice and formed, and you don't have it like gooey falling all over the place. So rather than sit here waiting overnight, I baked a pie yesterday because I like baking pies, and I'm going to cut into that and show you how it is. As you can see now, this is the pie that I made yesterday, and it is set and I am ready to cut it. Now, the good thing about pies is that you can make them ahead of time. Like I said, I like to make mine a day ahead of the actual day I'm going to serve it, but you could also make it like 2 days ahead of time. I like to store mine at room temp for up to 2 days. If we're going to start any longer than that, put it in the fridge. You could also freeze this pie, but you want to make sure that you wrap it up really, really tight, and you can freeze it for up to 3 months. So just going to go ahead and get my knife and make sure, cut me a slice. Pecan pie. We like a pecan pie. I'm kind of horrible at cutting pies. This is somebody else's job, but I'm going to do it today. Look, I always cut like really small pieces. Oh man, so I cut it too big. Oh, it's gonna. Oops. I cut a really big slice. And now for the taste test. Can you see the pecans at the top and the custard at the bottom? Let's give her a try. Oh, God. Anyways, guys, that's it. That's how you make a delicious and easy pecan pie from scratch. Anyways, until the next time, bye. 4, 3, 2. Stop that. Let's do it again. All right.